Hello, here we are today. I'm really excited because I know our guest, sort of. We're in a workshop together, and I'm really excited to hear her story coming to us from Weston, Connecticut. Carolyn. Carolyn, thank you for
Yes,
being here.
thank you for
Welcome.
having me. I'm so honored. I'm so excited to share my story in a layered sort of way that our journey tends to unravel itself. I spent some time looking through my poetry that I've been writing for 30 years, which is basically art trying to make sense of our own histories. And I chose a couple of poems that better explain myself. And the
Mhm.
very first poem I chose, I literally chose for both of you. So
Oh,
it's called Walking Alone. I try not to look over my shoulder when I'm walking down the street. I fear one day some crazy woman will tap me on my shoulder and tell me she's my mother. And then what do I do? Take her home and make her soup, introduce her to my husband, and let her pet my dog? But why did she leave me nearly 30 years ago? I know my father was not there when I was born. She was alone. I have struggled for years to know myself. And now that I do, I can't let some nut crack open the vision I have created. The one behind the window, I can't open or see through. I can't break it, but I know it's there. When I'm walking down Third Avenue, I look straight ahead, walk as fast as I can to avoid the woman behind me.
Mm, that gave
excellent.
me chills.
That's excellent.
Well, I
Like,
chose it.
don't crack that veneer, right? Like,
I chose that for you.
thank
So,
you.
um, so that goes to not without saying. So I'm baby scoop era, same as both
Yeah,
of you. We have
right.
actually have a both of we have a lot in common, all of us. I was adopted in the late 60s. I was born 67,
Mhm.
adopted 68. More to that later. I was born in Connecticut, and then we moved when I was 7 to the DC area. My father was, as with some of us in the baby scoop era, so my mother was a doctor, which was very unusual at the time.
Yeah.
She would have been educated at Smith. She was right after Sylvia Plath, and she got educated at medical school in the Women's College of Pennsylvania. Now, in those
Wow.
days, women could not go to medical schools. It was segregated because they would be taking the place of a male in the school system in the system. So I feel like I am,
Fascinating.
you
Yeah.
know what it is that we're living the generational gaps and
Yeah.
the generational changes socially and governmentally with systemic change. We are still relics of the 1950s,
Hmm.
which I will elaborate more as we get to my story. So I was born in Connecticut. We moved to the DC area. My father was a nuclear engineer. My mother was a doctor. Moved with my brother, who was also adopted. And
Why
we're,
did, not to interrupt, but why did they
yeah.
adopt?
Okay, so this goes back to their fertility problem became
Mm-hmm.
my problem. So I was a solution to their problem.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
Carolyn, I have to tell you, that's so funny you should say that. We'll come back,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
we have a Patreon Zoom once a month, and we had a new guy who's just kind of discovering stuff and finding podcasts, and he was in a family of a lot of adopted kids, and he
You
said
are.
we are both the problem and the solution. So it's funny
Just this
that
past week.
it's a
Yeah.
recurring thing now. Yeah.
Yes, it's very difficult to understand yourself in context.
Yes.
And in my case, it took 50 years to understand the context of what I am and why I am and accepting why I am. So, there's a couple things that I'd recommend to other people reading. I mean, I highly recommend Joan Didion. She had
Hmm.
adopted her daughter. Her nonfiction work talks a lot about this. And in fact, she has a great line where she says, but in Los Angeles, what we would do is have the lawyer take the kid out to have the child out to lunch and say, oh, by the way, you're adopted.
Oh,
That's in one of her books. She like explains like what it was like in California at the time. So her also being infertile with her husband, which is
mm-hmm.
why they adopted. So my parents were not able to have children. And as we all know, it was the baby scoop era and they were just moving babies around.
Yeah.
I believe I was probably placed with my parents because I had what's called a subluxated hip, and I had to have a brace. More on this later, but I had to have a brace, and my mother was a doctor, which was very rare in those days. So they had this adopting couple that had a doctor, and I had a subluxated hip. So I was also, as you can see, I'm half Finnish and I'm half Italian. And my mother was a 5-foot Italian woman, even though I'm a 5'7" Nordic looking person. And my father was Pennsylvania Dutch.
You were like
So-
good on paper.
Exactly. I call it
So-
the paper. I call it a paper.
Yeah.
That's in a couple of the poems I marked, actually. So it's like a paper thing. They look and
Yeah.
they go, okay, this person, this, and it's literally they're shuffling the papers in the social services office, as we know. And then it
Yeah.
kind of like, boop, here's your life now. So, and that same thing happened with my brother. So we moved to the DC area, and I think my mom was a little ahead because instead of trying to camouflage it and make excuses, where of course my brother and I look nothing alike, we look nothing like our parents. I'm completely blonde in a family of brunettes and, just nothing alike. And so at age 7, my mother, I remember everything that happened. I was sitting in my room. I was watching the Brady Bunch on my black and white television, because I think this was about 1974. And my mom came in, which was weird. And she sat with me, which was weird. She was sitting on the floor. And then she just turned. And I think I must have been asking a lot of questions at the time.
Mhm.
So
So
she's
you
coming
didn't, they
at
hadn't told you yet that you were
no,
adopted.
no.
Ah.
I think
That's
I
pretty
started.
old. That's pretty old,
That's,
actually.
yeah.
Right. But the thing is, and I understand this from their perspective, remember, my brother would have been 5.
Mm.
And they would have had to tell both of us at the same time because we look absolutely nothing alike. And you're in a situation where you're in the suburbs of DC, where you're with all these families that everybody looks exactly alike. So you're wondering, like, this is really kind of strange. So my mom sits me down after the Brady Bunch and tells me that I'm adopted. And I get the same sort of story that we all did, that we're so lucky. And this was a young girl who was in trouble. And then you're sitting there going, okay, but we go to church and I'm told that Jesus was born to a virgin. Hold on a minute here. So immediately the questions start to come. And in my case, that's when the insomnia started. But the thing is, I think I may have had this before she told me. When I say insomnia, what I mean is that I was having episodes, I now understand, where my reptilian brain was reliving my relinquishment, which turned out to be, which I'll get to later, much, much more dramatic and traumatic than I knew until I was in my 40s. So that's when I find everything out. So at 7, all I'm knowing is, okay, I was born in Connecticut. I don't live there anymore. Now I live in the DC area. I'm told I'm adopted. So insomnia. Because the minute you find out the information, I think that your brain just starts to process, like, okay, wait a minute, what happened to me? What happened to me? And you also start to envision yourself as apart. Here's your family, and you're over here, you're apart. So this distancing, this ability to be cold, this ability to be much more mature beyond your years started for me immediately at age 7. So we would drive every year from the DC area to Connecticut to be with my mom's family, who is still in Connecticut. I'm now in Connecticut. And every year we would drive by New York City. And every year my mother would say, New York is the most awful, stinkiest, horrible place. I don't know why anyone would live there. And from age 7, I said, that's where I'm going to live. If my mother can't stand it, that's exactly where I need to be. I need to live there. I have to do everything I can to live in New York. I have to live there. And it just was an immediate, as soon as I saw the city, I'm like, I'm supposed to live there. Cut to, I'm trying to apply to colleges. And I tell my parents I want to go to FIT, which this was blasphemy. Blasphemy.
Supposed to be a doctor.
I was supposed to be a lawyer because
Oh, okay.
I had my mom a doctor, my father a nuclear engineer. I'm supposed to be a lawyer. And I say, I don't want to be a lawyer. I want to go to Fashion Institute of Technology. I liked to illustrate. I liked to write. I was an editor on my newspaper. I was the art director of the yearbook. I was super into art. I loved everything art, Andy Warhol, everything. Like I sat and studied Interview magazine. My dad had to buy me an art table so I could sit downstairs and draw and illustrate and write. And my parents, basically, I was told pretty much my whole life that I was crazy. I was crazy. I'm nuts. I'm the black sheep. I'm everything. And remember, I also don't look like anyone.
Did you have
Right?
a close relationship at all? Like, did you with your dad or your mom, or was it?
My dad. My
Mm.
dad, although he came off as the most judgmental, was still the most accepting of me. My adoptive mother and I were oil and water. I mean,
Yeah.
she was embarrassed by me. She couldn't understand me, but I changed all that, which I'll not too much later than this. So they won't
Did
let me, yeah.
just had she miscarried? Was there a lost child or
Yeah.
anything?
All she ever told me, well, as good point, all she ever told me was that my father had surgery and nothing worked. But there was a dead child in my mother's family, which was that my mother grew up knowing that she was the replacement child for the daughter who had died with my
Oh.
grandmother. Because remember, my grandmother would have been born, I'm bad at math. She was born like 1910 or something. So she had my uncle who was 10 years older than my mom. And then they had another girl, and that baby died. Because remember, in the olden days of like the 20s and 30s, babies would die. And they lived, I think, in Italy at the time also. So there wasn't the same medication, or there wasn't the same
No.
water supply, all that stuff. So my mother was 10 years apart from her brother.
So she had her own trauma, her own
Oh my
Yeah.
generational
gosh.
trauma. Yeah.
If you talk to my adoptive mom within the first 10 minutes, you would learn that she was hit with a belt by her father.
Oh.
But this is the same father who supported her to go to medical school. So there's this very big, odd dynamic there. Okay. Now, the good news for me with that is that starting age 7, I'm apart. I'm apart from them. I don't really have anything to do with them. I live with them. I love my dad, but I'm apart from them. And I was,
Interesting, isn't it? How that happens to, we had another guest who, as
Yeah.
soon as Annie, I always cite her,
Annie,
but
I was thinking.
she's, when she found out at 6 or 7, she flat out said, "You're not my mom. You're not my mother," and just, that was it for her. Same age. Interesting.
And
yeah,
your brother found out at the same time when he was
yes,
5, but
yes.
he looked a little bit more
No,
part of, no,
he
neither.
was just literally more casual about it. He
Okay.
was just more casual about it. But now, see, now that we're talking about this, I'm going, but wait a minute. He was told at 5 and I was told at 7.
Yeah, 7's
And
very
those
old.
are
7's
very,
late.
It is late.
those are big ages
Mm-hmm.
to be, that's a big difference in the development of a
Even
child.
5 is late.
It
honestly.
is.
Agreed.
Yeah.
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 So so I'm a teenager. I'm trying to apply to FIT, and my parents are like, absolutely no way. They were like, this is when they're like, there's no way any daughter of ours is going to New York City, blah, blah, blah. So I end up at Syracuse. Fine. So I start to immediately be apart, and I'm plotting my, like, how do I get out of here? How do I get out of here? So I graduate from Syracuse, which was an amazing, great experience. And I did a study abroad in London, and I tried to figure out how do I stay here? Like, I need to be as far away as possible. So I end up going to New York. I moved there at 21. And I always say, I'm like, you want to know what life is like? I had $600, and my dad just dropped me off. God love him, because he drove me up there. He brought my art table, my typewriter, because it was the olden days. And he just said, here you go. Don't come back.
Oh,
He just was like, we're doing this.
okay.
So at that point is when I finally had the discussion with my mother that I was alluding to with Sarah at 21. There was one day I called my mother, and I can't remember what we were fighting about, something stupid. And probably like I didn't know how to cook something or something. She was like yelling at me. And I just said to her, I just go, Mom, let me tell you something. You're not satisfied with you. Therefore, you will never be satisfied with me. I am satisfied with me. And that just shut the conversation down and changed our relationship forever.
It did change it in a
Forever.
Okay.
I became the mother. She became the child. I was 21. So I am in New York. I meet my husband at 22. We're still married. He comes from a broken family, step
Mhm.
kids and all that stuff. So we have a lot in common. We basically grow up together. He's Norwegian. I'm Finnish. That's my married last name is Bjerke. It all kind of makes sense, right?
Did
Yeah.
did your parents tell you anything about your
Nope. Nothing.
nothing? Did you ask
Nothing.
questions like, well, who is my mother? What were this? Nothing. They told you nothing.
I was told nothing because, and these are the verboten words, the agency. The agency told us it was a young girl in trouble. The agency said you had to go away. So you're growing up, and this is, here, I'm a poet, because the vernacular that you are growing up with is that there is a problem, and
Mhm.
you are the problem. Someone was in trouble, which meant there was a problem. And the vernacular is trouble, problem, crisis, right?
Yeah, it's
And
true. Yeah.
that's us. So so this is the part of my life, my teenage life and my young 20s where I believe I'm magical. Okay. I start to believe I'm a witch, I'm magical, everything about me is different. I'm always that 1%. Anything that happens that's bad, it's because I'm that 1%. I'm a witch. I'm reading tarot cards. I have pink hair. I'm like living into it, right? I'm like, I live in New York now. I'm basically a witch. Let's just go with it.
Are
And
you
then I
living
realized
with your husband? Are you already married or?
we dated for 2 years. We were 22, 23.
Mhm.
We moved in 24, 25. We got married at 26. And my mom was mad about that.
I'm sure.
But my mom was mad about everything all the time. So that none of that was
Right.
abnormal for me. I'm like, well, she's just perpetually angry. Like that's not, whatever. So what would happen in those days, my husband and I were big, big partiers. We lived in the village. We went out every single night. I
We
would get
probably
drunk.
crossed paths.
Oh, I probably met you in a bar. I literally once went to a meeting so I work in the film business. I work in the advertising part of the film business. I once went to a meeting with one of the head creative directors of J. Crew, and this was years later. And she looks at me across the room. She goes, "Did you used to live in the village?" And I go, "Yeah." She goes, "Did you used to go to the international bar?" I go, "Yeah." She goes, "I know you."
I
I was
know
like, "I
you.
bet you do." So I would go out and we would like drink or do shots with it. And every night I would end up hysterical crying. Every night. This is for years. I mean, I don't know how my
And had
husband.
you at this point started wondering
No.
yourself about who you were?
Oh, I'm writing it. I'm putting it in poetry. I started the classes at the 92nd Street Y. David Sedaris was there when I was there,
Oh.
although I am not David Sedaris. And I was taking classes at the Y starting in the mid 90s because art is trying to formulate your emotion.
Mhm.
You're putting, and when you're writing or creating painting or art, you're physically manifesting your thoughts and you're able to manipulate it. So poetry was my way of saving myself, like in a major way, saving
Yeah.
me addiction, saving me my magical. I'm going to get, so this goes to a good second poem. This is a very short one. This is called Loss. Loss, after Ezra Pound. Loss knows me, knows my body, knows my name, remembers my face, and constantly picks me out of a crowd. So this is my mindset in my 20s. Like
It's funny. You're not
Mhm.
to interrupt. You're saying this. I was in London, maybe at the same time as you, actually, in '88 for a year.
I was there in '88.
Yeah, abroad, and I had all this poetry. I found the book recently.
Me too.
Poetry, crying just every night. We would drink. I'd sit in the back of this house and just write all about I'm not fitting anywhere. And then I kind of put that aside. It's so weird, but I sort of put that away when I returned to California. I don't know if that
But
makes
you
sense.
fit with the poets.
Yes.
That's the
Yeah.
thing, is that
Yeah.
you did have a constituency with us.
Mhm.
Because poetry is news that stays news.
Yeah.
You can read poems, Shakespeare
love it.
on up, that
Yeah.
and realize, oh my gosh, these were written. You'll read something from 50 years ago, and it
Yeah.
literally seems like they wrote it yesterday. It's just crazy.
No, I
So
was a Shakespeare major at that time and switched my major to poli-sci because what are you going to do with Shakespeare? But that was my whole like, oh, like this broody. But anyway, go on. It's I
yeah.
loved
So
what you wrote. That was
well,
beautiful.
oh, thank you. Well, I have
Yeah.
two more for you too, but I was picking specifically for you. So I'm did it as if I'm just talking with you. So I divorced my writing life with my economic life. I was lucky enough to be able to do that. So I work in advertising and film as like my work life. And then I split off my poetry and writing because I originally was a journalist, which I hated because it just ruined my writing. It was like, what is this? So I split off my writing, and I finally ended up applying. I applied to graduate school 3 different times. I applied in the 90s to NYU. I made the waiting list and then I got rejected. This is very specific. I was applying to the MFA program for poetry. These are tiny programs that take very few people per year. Then I applied to Hunter maybe 5 years later, and then I got rejected from Hunter. And then finally, actually, this is a funny story. I was at a wedding and I saw my screenwriting teacher from the new school, and he was there with Danny Elfman was his date. We were at like a big musician's wedding. My husband was like the coolest person in the Greenwich Village for a long time, so we knew everybody. And I'm at this wedding and I see my teacher and I'm like, oh my God. And he's like, oh, I'm here with Danny Elfman's date. I was like, what? And he's like, oh, this is Danny Elfman. I'm like, oh my God, hi. And I said, Lauren, listen, I was going to call you this week because I can't take it anymore. I have to get my master's degree. I got to go to NYU. He goes, no, I won't do it. I won't write your recommendation. I said, why not? He goes, because you have to study with Lucy Brock-Broido at Columbia. I said, Lauren, I am never going to get into Columbia because the 2 biggest places for poetry are Iowa and Columbia. And Columbia takes 16 people a year, 16. Okay. I said, Lauren, I'm never going to get in. He goes, I'm going to talk to Lucy. You have to go there. So I'm like, yeah, right. I'm going to Columbia. And then I was speaking with Molly Peacock, who's still my teacher, who I was taking the class with earlier this week. And she was the former president of the Poetry Society of America. And I told her what Lauren had said. And she said, oh, you should go to Columbia. I said, what are you people talking about? So long story short, it was a very dramatic year 2000. And I end up pregnant. My husband and I are finally pregnant. And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. And within a 24-hour period, I lose the pregnancy, but I get into Columbia. But when I lose the pregnancy, this is not like a normal person. Because remember, I'm in my magical thinking I'm a witch. Is there anything that could happen that's a 1%? It's me. I'm 1% all the time. So I end up with a ruptured ectopic and almost die. And I'm at Mount Sinai. And if you've ever been to a New York City emergency room, this pretty much sums it up. I get to the emergency room and the orderly comes out with a clipboard and goes, who's the internal bleeder? Oh. And I'm like sitting, I'm in the waiting room at Mount Sinai. And there's literally like people with like bullet holes and there's like a stab wound and someone who's been in a car accident. Who's the internal bleeder? And I'm like, there's like literally 200 people in there. And I raise my hand. He goes, you come with me. So I go in the back. And basically this whole process happens where I have to have emergency surgery and I almost die in the whole thing. And I knew I knew it was bad because when I woke up, I had this beautiful room with a view of Central Park. And I went, oh, I must have been really sick. Like, you don't just get this room, like something's going on here. And my mom, to her credit, because she was a doctor, she kept saying to me, it's really weird that you would be this healthy 30-year-old and have something like this. Like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, and I'm in my magical thinking of, oh, no, it's me. I'm a witch. Listen, I just so I get into Columbia. Nobody gets into Columbia. And I have a ruptured ectopic and really few healthy people have ruptured ectopics. That's just my life, Mom. And she never really bought that from me. She was always a little like, my mom's, to her credit, because remember, we've switched roles. I'm the mom, she's the kid. So now she's coming to me with things bugging me constantly. It bothers me. I don't have your history. It bothers me. Like, she starts with this stuff because I'm trying to have kids. And I know this is a running theme with the podcast that as soon as we get into the fertility part, this whole thing kind of explodes. So I give her I kind of shun her.
She's saying that to you. She's saying it bothers you.
She wants to know your history.
My mom is saying it is a problem that you don't have the history, because I'm doing what all of us did for all those years. When you're going to the exams, what's the history here? None. How come you have none? I have no no one's told me. Why? Because our records were sealed Everything was locked. Nobody told you anything. There was no 23. There was nothing for decades, which probably killed a number of us with
Oh,
these
I'm
sorts of
sure. Yes.
these
Right.
sorts of things. So cut to, I end up okay, so I graduate from Columbia. I'm still working in my business. I have another miscarriage, because remember, I'm the 1%. If something bad's going to happen, it's going to be me. This is how I live. I'm a New Yorker. I'm tough, da, da, da. And I do finally get pregnant with my daughter, who's now at UConn, a sophomore. And around this time is when my adoptive dad, I think she was 5, he starts dying of cancer. Because of course, this is where my life intersects with Oppenheimer, because my dad was a nuclear engineer for the country. And he actually worked for the part of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which was part of what Oppenheimer started from the movie with the Atomic Commission and da-da.
Right.
So the thing is, as you saw in the movie, those people were not wearing any protective gear, and they're watching these giant explosions. So my father was in places that normal Americans were not supposed to be in the 60s and 70s, like nuclear reactors and nuclear submarines. And so
We just talked about that. So he did get cancer. I
Yes.
just had a friend talk.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he died. And Johns Hopkins said they'd only ever seen 60 cases of the type of cancer he had. It was so rare. So I'm driving back and forth from New York City to, my
Baltimore.
father passing away and everything. And we go through that whole mess and debacle. But of course, I'm a poet. I know all about death. And after he dies, about 9 months later, now at this point, my mom and I, we just have a totally different relationship, as many of us do. We're just like, we're friends, but I'm the mom, she's the kid. She comes to my apartment maybe 6 to 9 months after my dad passed away, and she hands me an envelope, and it's my papers.
She had them that whole time.
Had she had them the whole time?
She didn't know they existed.
Because your dad had them?
She
Safe
found
deposit
them
box?
in a safe.
So he
And
knew the whole time? Your
He had
story?
my papers.
He brokered it with somebody.
Or right. So it was a private adoption?
No, all through Connecticut State.
Huh.
Let the lawsuits begin.
Would she just have her? Yeah. I mean,
we'll get to that part too.
I mean, really honest.
Yeah.
We had,
wait till
we
you
have
hear
a
the
guest
rest.
that said,
So,
nothing will change unless there's class action lawsuits.
No.
But
yeah.
so your mom just kind of had her head in the sand
Yeah, I was
for all
gonna say,
these
why
years?
didn't she know?
Yes. My mother was a woman of the 50s. She
Class-
went from her father's house to her husband's house.
Yeah.
She was very highly educated, but she was about 14 years old as a person. Like had
Right.
never lived on her own, had never done
He
anything
handled these
for
things.
herself.
He handled
my gosh.
all of
She
it.
would never even know it existed. My husband, God bless him, when he found out she handed them to me, he goes, because he knew my dad really well. They were actually, my husband's really a saint, and my parents were obsessed with him. I mean, I have a running joke that my husband is the best looking person my mother ever spoke to. So she was like obsessed with him. I always said, I'm like, oh, she doesn't like me. She just likes my husband. And my husband's an artist and a craftsman and a tattoo artist and whatnot. And so my dad was like, they could speak tools and talk, Home Depot and whatever. So they just loved my husband.
Home Depot.
Seriously. And when I told my husband that my mom handed me my papers, he just looks at me and goes, I can't believe your father didn't burn them. Just because that's how my dad would have felt. This is someone who worked for Admiral Rickover's nuclear navy, for the Navy.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I'm surprised he did keep them with all that.
I don't know why. So she hands me the papers. And of course, we were actually going on a trip to London as a family. I was doing a business trip. I was taking the family. And I was just like, because this is how it ran. I'm the mom. So I'm arranging for my mother to come with us. We're all going to London. We're renting an apartment. So I take the papers, I put them away, and I don't look at them for about 2 months.
So
And
even when your
finally-
daughter was born, you didn't have, it didn't.
I had nothing.
Remember,
I'm a witch.
Did it
That's
not
why I'm a witch.
spur? It didn't spur you to want to know, or?
As you heard from the very first poem I read you, which I wrote when I was in my 20s, when I was 30, I was wroting about this, getting drunk and crying about this my entire life. Like 7 on, not able to sleep.
I'm someone who would have maybe put those papers away too, to be honest. I've done that. I still haven't looked at all my things.
I couldn't even find mine today. I was going to try to look at a couple things and I couldn't even, I like, maybe I hid them from myself. But here's the thing is that it never occurred to me till listening to this podcast that my dad would have hidden the papers because he was afraid they were going to come get me.
Mhm.
Okay. It never occurred to me. No, everything that I'm going to tell you from this part on, nothing of this ever occurred to me. I was always told it was, do you guys remember the after school, the ABC after school special, I Want to Keep My Baby, starring Jodie
I
Foster?
do.
Oh,
I remember
yes.
it. Yeah.
So I was obsessed with this whole idea that this 16, 17-year-old, for whatever reason, did not try to keep me. So I had a demonized version of untruths as my reality this whole time. I'm, this in my magical thinking, right? I'm magical thinking. I'm 1%. Everything about me is weird. Of course, I'm going to almost die trying to get pregnant. That's my whole life. So I get the papers and I see the name of where I had been, which was called the New Haven Orphan Asylum.
Nice.
And I see there's a phone number.
Asylum.
And I go,
Just think of that. Asylum.
I see that I was sold for $560 with a receipt. And it's all state of Connecticut. And I say, okay. I Google it. I get a phone number and I think to myself, oh my God, please let this place have burned down. And I don't. I get a caseworker, a really lovely caseworker. And I tell her who I am and what I'm looking for. And of course, I'm told about what's illegal to know and not know. But she calls me back and says these are just, I have to kind of take myself a little out of this now because this is the tough part. And she goes, Carolyn, I'm not supposed to share any of this with you, but your post-adoptive file is so big that I have to send some of this to you. And I say, oh, and she goes, I need to tell you that you live 6 blocks from your biological father.
At this time, when you're talking.
I live on 72nd Street, and she informs me that my biological father lives on East 68th Street, and that we work in the same business.
Gosh.
Wow.
And for all these years, I have been told I'm crazy, I'm an artist, I'm this, I'm a witch, I'm crazy. And she says, I am not supposed to do this, but your adoptive file is so extensive. I need to mail it to you.
So extensive, meaning there were a lot of in between before they took you home.
Because I was searched for 25 years by my biological father. And the story of my biological mother is so heart-wrenching. I have to read a poem for you first. And then we can talk about it.
Can I ask one thing before you read the poem?
Please.
So part of the extensive file is that he's been writing in.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Okay.
There are letters. There is him searching for me.
Heartbreaking.
25 years.
Yeah.
So this sums it up, and then I'll go to what happened. Crisis. It was a crisis. I was a crisis. I am good in a crisis. The crisis ruined lives. What is a crisis? It is a stage in a sequence of events at which the trend of all future events, for better or worse, is determined. My crisis divided people. I was the crisis. A crisis ruins people. As a crisis, I caused my mother to fall to pieces in white beds while I waited in an orphanage, a foster home, then away from her. I have not found her to stroke her head after the crisis of myself. They say she might have survived the crisis if I had died. Maybe I am dead. I am still in crisis.
Thank you for sharing.
So powerful and devastating.
So I get a call from my biological father, and he is uncontainable, is a good way to put it. He has moved to LA, but still has his apartment in New York, which is the address that she saw, which is right by where I live. And he had worked at HBO in 10 years in acquisitions, and heard or knew that I worked as an agent in the film business and the advertising side. And he's just like, wants to remember and talk to me about everything as quickly as possible. And this is very hard to do, because at this point in my life, I'm 42 years old. I'm a mother. I'm very successful in my business. I have a master's degree. You know, I'm like, I'm very good at separating myself
I was going
in
to say very
situations.
compartmentalized.
Compartmentalizing, yeah.
I'm very good
Mhm.
at this. And I get this person who is just like, and
Yeah.
here was the problem. He was married, but never had any kids.
Mm.
He was waiting for me my whole life.
Did he purposely not have kids because of you, or?
I think mentally, probably yes. I think that the situation was
It's
so
devastating to him.
which
Yeah.
I will get to after I meet him, and I'll tell you what happened. So he and his wife, long-term wife, come to New York, and I have them over for dinner. And
And she knew about you before this.
Yes,
He
yes.
had talked about it
He spent 25 years looking for me. He was looking for me everywhere.
openly.
He was
Yeah.
registered at AmFAR. He was like trying to figure out what I would contact, where I
Wow.
would go, what I would do. And I just never did anything because that wasn't what we were told we were supposed to do. And even
course.
though I was a rebel and a witch and all the other things that I was not I would say I was not a traitor, is the way that I would have
Yeah.
felt at the time.
Right. Which is,
Bef-
you know, that systemic
Mhm.
brainwashing, indoctrination of that is adoption. And your daughter at this point is
She's 5.
5.
And this is
Okay.
very touchy with my husband, because my biological father, is extremely interested in my daughter. And it's weird.
Yeah, like, well,
It's
like here's
weird.
my grandchild. It's like a
Yeah.
do-over. It's a do-over.
You're
Well, the
right.
thing is, he's festered all of this intense emotion for years and years, whereas I, as you heard from my very first poem, I never even knew he existed. Never knew he existed. He didn't even think he knew I existed. When he told me he knew when my birthday was, I was floored. I had no idea. Like that sort of
It's very
idea
common that it's the mother we think about, but here he is having this
never
loss. Yeah.
occurred to me. So when I'm reading the papers, the orphanage asylum place tells me that my biological mother was part of the lithium trials of the 70s, and that there was a big accident with her. And even though I do have her name, which, by the way, Louise, my biological mother's name is Linda.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah. So what I find out is, here's the series of events that really happened. Here's what really happened. What really happened was, my biological parents were students at University of Connecticut, where my daughter currently goes. And they were in their sophomore year. I think they were 20 years old. And there was very little information about birth control or women's bodies or anything really.
Yeah.
And my
Yeah.
biological mother's mother had died in 1961 of some sort of who knows what. And she had a stepmother. So she gets pregnant with me. Neil's my biological father. So he tries to marry her. She's not interested. She's like, no, this isn't going to happen. She gets sent to a maternity home where she has a series of mental breakdowns.
Mhm.
I believe she was drugged, which would have led to my subluxated hip, because there's no reason a 20-year-old should be giving birth to a malformed baby, which is what I was.
Mhm.
And she gives birth to me, reneges on the adoption,
Oh, she did.
and leaves the hospital with me for a week. Nobody knows where she was, where we
Took off
were.
with you.
She left. She
Did-
went to
did-
friends.
Did Neil know?
No. And she then brought me back to the orphanage asylum. She had a nervous breakdown. She was committed to a mental institution.
Mhm.
I was put into a foster home. And only because of this podcast has it occurred to me that while I was in this foster home, I may not have been the only baby, which that never occurred
Right.
to
You're
me
picturing
until I
I'm just
started
the baby,
listening.
but there's several often.
I have a
Right.
feeling there were
Yeah.
probably several. I was given the name Maggie, and I was in this foster home for 5 months.
She named you Maggie?
No, the foster mother.
Did she name you? She was with you for a week.
No,
And
not that
Hmm.
I know of. Neil told me if she was going to name me, it would have been Jacqueline.
Jacqueline. So
Going
here
back
you
to the
are,
Kennedys.
Maggie. So people are saying Maggie, Maggie, Maggie for
Yes.
5 months. Yeah.
Yes.
And then, yeah.
Yes. And then the only thing that I connect to this situation is one time when my father was dying of cancer, he mentioned something to me about me being a couple of months old because of a paperwork problem. Now, the paperwork problem was that my biological mother was trying to keep me, but she had been committed to a mental institution, and she was then sued by the state of Connecticut for child abandonment.
Nice.
So she
had everything against her.
Forced into relinquishment. She had a father and a stepmother, Neil, who had gone to New York City and whatever, he was a teacher or whatever. He was trying to get away from not getting drafted to Vietnam. And and the truth of the matter is I was already sold. I was already sold to my parents. Like I had already been matched. They were like, so that's my
she had no chance.
She couldn't stand a chance
like,
against the system. It was a
No.
forced
it's like
relinquishment.
Margaret in
It
Better
is, very
Baby, right?
much.
Who my mother too was forced to give me up. Not allowed to even hold me. I mean, these stories are, and this stuff still goes on.
And she tried to keep you. I mean, just leaving for a week is just heartbreaking.
Oh, the whole thing is just, here's the thing. We're still rewriting our stories.
Right.
Even in our 50s, which is still happening for me. So
I'm still
find all this
together.
out.
Yeah.
I find all this out. This is in my 40s. I start a relationship with Neil. He's way too intense and it's too bizarre.
Adoptees don't like neediness.
Well, the thing is, I had that only child feeling.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't, this is not like
pressure.
No. So I had a relationship with him for maybe a year or two. And then I got a call from my biological uncle's wife, I guess my aunt, right before COVID, and Neil had died of cancer.
Oh.
But if you looked at his obituary, I'm not mentioned. So now here's the thing though. I had stopped contact at that point because his ravings to me started to get like
too much.
Unhinged to where it was like my husband had to step in a couple of times. Like it had to, there were just some pretty big problems that were not. So given that, I was not, and am still not, in the mental capacity of hiring a PI to go find out the rest of the truth about my mother. My doctor, and here's why. My doctor in Manhattan, because I was trying so hard to have what are my now twins. When this was going on with Neil, my father had died. I'm meeting my biological mother and I'm in fertility treatments. I had 3-4 other miscarriages. Because remember, I'm still a witch. Some things, I can't do normal things. I'm not normal. Well, it turns out from getting my papers and getting some of my medical information that I had been given x-rays in the late 60s on my abdomen because of the subluxation.
Probably a bunch of them too.
Which I then brought some of that paperwork to Mount Sinai saying, this is why I keep miscarrying. So at this point, I get all these friends saying, oh, don't you want to adopt children? I was like, no. So my twins were egg donor. So and here's why, because they have the exact same birth story as my daughter. They were same doctors, same hospital, same everything. I have told them, You were put into me. It was a problem with me. They know about this. They've known it their whole lives. Not a big deal. My daughter, my younger twin and my older daughter, they look exactly alike. Like if you look at their baby picture, you can't even tell them apart. So, like I made my own family despite what was done to me physically when I was a ward of the state. I was the ward of the state, and no one gave me my records. No one told me that my fertility was affected. The x-rays are, I believe, why I had the ruptured ectopic and why I had multiple miscarriages. Cut to, I have my twins. I switched doctors because we moved from New York to Connecticut after I have my twins, which I call them my life-saving twins. And I go to a new doctor. And this is the first time I've had medical history. And I'm talking to my new doctor in Connecticut. And she says, is there cancer on either side? And I say, well, I don't have any information about my biological mother. I'm adopted, and this is the story. But my biological father told me, he was from Greenwich, by the way, which is 20 minutes from where I live now. And my biological mother was from Waterbury. So I live kind of like in the middle of where they both would have lived. And I said, well, my biological father told me that his mother died when he was young of breast cancer. And she goes, my doctor now said, how old was she? And I said, I don't know. And she goes, was she premenopausal? And I said, yes. And my doctor said, you have to be tested for BRCA.
Yeah, right away.
Which I have. And I have now had a double mastectomy and reconstructive surgery because Neil was able to tell me some of my medical history.
Yeah.
And if all of that hadn't happened, I would be still I would still be just with Paige living in Manhattan, but I'd have triple negative breast cancer and either be dead or in chemo right now.
Yeah, it's so vital. What a story. So now your daughter, your biological daughter
she will have to be tested.
Yes. Question about your twins. So there may come a time when they're interested in knowing their biological history. Do you have all that for them?
I do have it. But I also can tell them where to get it. You know what I mean? Like I know it's like, here's where I went. This is who I was dealing with. Like if they need to know more from them, like it's not a problem. I can get it all for them. I was pretty specific in what type of person I wanted and whatnot. And I was very lucky, Manhattan being Manhattan, they can find a needle in a haystack. And, the egg donor that we got, like when the nurse called me, she goes, Carolyn, she looks exactly like you. Like I remember I opened the file and she was my exact height, weight. I was like, what? And she had a master's degree, which was the other thing, because I have a master's, and, my family I grew up with, everyone's very overly educated, and she fit that bill.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there is some thought that surrogate children may have some of the same feelings that adopted people have,
Well, this was different because I was the surrogate. Like I
don't mean this. Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like for my twins, everything was literally exactly the same except for the egg transfer. And they've seen a picture of the eggs. My son goes, how did you get this? I said, from the doctor before you were put into me. Like they know like what happened. But they also know that just like my older daughter, they were born on 99th Street and 5th Avenue at Mount Sinai. This is who the doctor was. Daddy was in the delivery room. Like everything was the same. I spent 16 years making my family, and it all came back to my relinquishment, what happened when I was a ward of the state. Not me being magical, not me being the 1%, not me being some witch. It was all because of what happened to me. And I have those moments of, what lawyer do I need to talk to? Because this
for
is
sure.
I mean,
so
you have not found your biological mother.
I have not done the search. I just can't. It's not.
Is she still living?
I highly doubt it. From what I understand.
But you don't know.
I don't know. From what I understand, she was either she either self-harmed or had something happen with this lithium test trial and is most likely in a vegetative state somewhere. And
Oh,
when I
geez.
was going through all of the miscarriages trying to have the twins, my doctors in Manhattan were very, very concerned about me. And you do have psychological evaluations during those
Yes.
fertility treatments and whatnot. And they kept saying, my doctor, Dr. Laura, who I love, would say to me, Carolyn, don't get caught up in their drama. You just can't do it. You're okay now. You're okay now. And I read Steve Jobs' biography, which I highly recommend also. And when you read his thoughts about not meeting his biological father when he knew who he was, everything he said, I agreed with. And a lot of it was in his case because he'd had such drama with his biological mother also, with her calling, crying, with her. And I had that with my biological father. And to go into a situation that I know is not good, not going to be good, I was not prepared to do that when I was in the fertility treatments when my kids were little. I mean, listen, my kids are now, my oldest is 19, a sophomore in college, and my youngest, my twins are 9. They're going to be
Oh, they're
10.
9. Yeah.
And the thing is, we just went through COVID. I'd gone through that. It's like, I just, Louise, I mean, I do think about it, and this
Yeah.
podcast has actually made me think about it more.
You're not ready.
I will
Mm.
at some point get the rest of the story. But because of the high drama and the fact that, remember, right before COVID is when I finished my surgeries. Like
Yeah.
I had 2 years of surgeries. So
No, you've definitely had some big stuff.
I mean, so I've had my ovaries removed. I've
Yeah.
had a double mastectomy, reconstructive surgery. I mean, I appreciate that the universe and my mother, my adoptive mom, allowed me all of the information that I have, which has allowed me to literally still be alive today in the form that I'm in today. But the rage that I still
Ugh,
have
of course.
over everything I just told you,
Yeah.
especially currently as a mother and someone watching our fertility
I know,
laws be
right?
changed to the
Oh, yeah.
detriment of young women. I have also spoken at a rally with my senator, with Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut. I mean, they've heard me like explain my story. And my twins were there and they kept saying, Mommy, why were you so mad? And I said, one day you'll understand.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, I just have to, the one thing that you'll find interesting in the letter that my biological father had posted when I was 25 that he had sent to the New Haven Orphan Asylum, the first thing it said was, the strongest traits in you are going to be music and poetry. And when I first talked to him on the phone and he said, tell me about your life. And I said, well, this is what I do and here's where I live. And I have an undergrad degree from Syracuse in journalism and English, and I have a master's degree in poetry from Columbia. And he said, I knew you would. And
he really was invested in you. And did he know about what happened to your mother? Is that why you know some things that happened? No.
He never really knew what happened to her. I mean, this is what's so strange about that time, as we know. I mean, he told me that the last time he had any contact with her was the day I was born. He called the hospital and he said to me, do you know what it took for me to even be able to do that? Because the thing is, she had her mother die in 1961 and she had a stepmother, and his mother had died of the breast cancer and he had a stepmother. And this would have been in 67.
Oh yeah, and they're 20. I mean,
right. And both of them would have had step parents, which that at the time was not normal to have that sort of a family structure. So expectation was like,
the divorce wave didn't really hit till the early 70s.
No.
right. So they were having, there was a big legal challenge to my birth certificate that his family, because they were from Greenwich, like didn't want his name on my original birth certificate, which by the way, I still don't have. I printed out the paperwork because it became legal, I believe, in 2022. And I printed out all the paperwork, and Louise, I couldn't do it. It's still sitting on my desk
It's
because I'm just in that, like,
overwhelm.
I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm gonna just sum this up with this one last poem, which is I read this for you. I read this for you. History lessons. When someone gave me the tablet of myself to record upon, I chose my chisel to carve my stories into the pure, smooth stone. The metal leg brace, birthday parties of others and my own, battles with my brother, homecoming photos on the lawn, living in London, graduating from college, becoming a wife, moving uptown to the east side, letting my words out of prison, hemorrhaging on the emergency room floor, planning a baptism. And I thought the hard part was trying to keep the dust of my life from filling my eyes blind. But I knew some events happened before I started sculpting this record. And one day I saw through the cloud where the first tablet with my initials sat covered in dew. To my surprise, there were experiences of mine fashioned upon this tablet by numerous authorities, an unknown lot. And I learned that everything I thought was my fault was not.
Mm,
Mm. Wow.
it's beautiful.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. This has really been,
I'm like speechless from it.
yeah, such a,
Well,
such
I
a,
will sign copies of my book and
Please.
send it
Please
to you.
do.
So
Yes,
it is available on Amazon. I'll send you the link.
give us
Please,
the
we'll
link
put it in
because
the
we'll put
show
it in the show
notes.
notes. Yeah, we
And
need all of that stuff.
do, and for any other adoptees who want to read thoughts, I do have a Substack that's free.
Oh yeah.
So, and
Send us
I
everything.
post some of that too.
Please.
But
Yeah.
let me know if you have any other questions.
Oh, I feel I'm just I don't have questions. I have so many relatable comments, and I had the feeling of I always wanted to go to California. Nobody in my family, they're all East Coasters and Midwesterners, but very hardcore East Coast. I spent my summers in the East Coast, and I said I'm going to California no matter what. That was my thing, and that's my birth mother was drawn to California. So I do think we have our little
I was New York as you
yeah
know, same thing. And then
the
I'm not sure you
places.
know this. I've talked about it, but my birth mother and I in 1990 didn't know each other, lived across the street from each other on 6th between A and B for 6 months across the street from each other.
I mean, that's where I was with Neil, where when we really think about it, it's like, no, we would have walked past each other on the sidewalk. He was on East 68th. I was on East 72nd.
Oh, it's crazy. Well, and just the not, I understand, I have a birth father out there, and I know who he is. We've talked, but I'm not going down that deep road right now. I don't know what stops me. Many things. It's a lot. Even just doing the podcast, you have so many feelings every day. Sometimes it's a lot.
Yeah.
But here's the thing is that you have to do what's best for you.
That's
In
right.
every situation.
Yeah. What you're in the place to
It
do.
goes kind of contrary to the sort of people pleasing
Yeah.
problem / solution,
Yeah.
never
like that.
really being able to do what's right for you is a
Yeah.
habit of a lifetime. That is a good place to end and say thank you. And this was
Very much.
beautiful.
Thank
and
you. I'm
Really,
happy to meet you. Sarah's
Yeah.
spoken about you. So I was excited about this. So
It was hard for me not to reveal too much to her in the class.
I know.
well, and I have to say the poetry really added to, I'm really thank you for
Mhm.
picking those pieces and the
Love it if you
timeliness.
could, if you would, maybe,
Absolutely.
give us the
Sure.
text so we can put that in the show notes too. All right. Well, we're going to say goodbye now. Louise, you want to?
Yeah.